Hi everybody, welcome to Dynamo Sword Channel. I am David, and today on Sword Re-Reviews, we will be reviewing the Windlass Heroes Warsword. So if you're familiar with my channel, or you've seen any of my cutting videos, you've probably seen this sword in action. So we do know it can cut and does pretty good functionally, but how has it held up over the years in regards to fit and finish? Well, let's get this re-review started and we will find out today. The Windlass Heroes Warsword classifies as a Scottish Lowland Claymore. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what a Claymore is a type of two-handed sword or great sword that originated in Scotland in the later period of the Middle Ages. Now, there are two distinct styles of Claymore. There is the Highland Claymore with its sloping quillions that ended in quarter-full terminals. And then there is the Lowland Claymore, which had a thinner, longer guard, ending in these little hook-shaped terminals, and also featured a unique onion bloom pommel. The other noticeable difference between Highland and Lowland Claymores is blade length. Lowland Claymores tended to have longer blades than your average Highland Claymore, and they also tended to have more intricate hilts, featuring side ring guards on the guard itself. So, being a later period sword, this was quite common for the swords at the time. They started getting the more intricate hilts. This sword, as well as the Highland, the Lowland and Highland, did seem to originate in around the mid to late 15th century. But it did have quite a long lifespan, going well into the early half of the 18th century. Now, some do believe that the Claymore is actually older and might have originated even in the 13th century. But I think a lot of that is confusion on what was known at the time the Warsword, which was what we know through the Oakshott typology as a type 13 or 13A. Now, if you look at those two swords side by side, or two of those swords side by side, you would see that a 13 and a Claymore do have very similar blade profiles, but where they differ is in their lengths. As being two-handed swords, Claymores were obviously larger, and then you also had the hilt styles, which again were very unique to the Claymore and not really seen in that time period, which was very cruciform and with your standard wheel pommel and straight guard on those earlier type 13s. This specific sword is a replica of one such supposed early period Claymore, said to have been owned and used by Robert the Bruce. Now, if you're not familiar with who Robert the Bruce is, he's a pretty well-known figure in Scotland. He is considered one of their greatest national heroes. He was one of the major leaders for the Scottish Battle of Independence in the 14th century, as well as being King of Scotland from the year 1306 until his death in 1329. Now, there isn't much evidence historically that this sword was Robert's sword or that he actually used it in combat, but it has been in the Bruce family for many generations. It is said to have been handed down from David II, Robert's son and heir, all the way to today, where it still remains in the Bruce family. Now, in regards to that, there is some theory that perhaps the whole sword itself, but just the blade, is from the time period, and then it was later hilted in the Lowland furniture. I mean, there could be possibility to that, but at the same time, when you look at swords in that 13th, 14th century time period, you don't see anything as big or even long as a great sword or Claymore in that time period. You do see that war sword like the type 13A, but still those did not get to any significant length as compared to a great sword like the Claymore or the Zweihander of the later 15th, 16th centuries. So in that regard, I would still consider this, obviously the Bruce sword, it's in their family, but I would not want to really say that it is from the 13th or 14th century. Next, we'll look at the statistics of the sword. So the overall length of the sword is a massive 64 inches long. Its weight is right at 6 pounds, and its point of balance is right at 8 inches from the guard. The center of percussion is about 30 inches from the guard, so right about up in here. And as I mentioned before, this sword would classify as a great sword. The blade's total length is 47 3/4 inches long. The base width is 2 inches, and due to its parallel edges, it does not have much, if any, profile taper. So that's 2 inches stays true down the full length of the blade. The tip is more spatulate or spade shaped in its termination, and the polish on the blade is a fine mirror polish. Now, this blade is made of 1065 high carbon steel. It does have a fuller that ends about a quarter length down the blade, and then it has a really nice and unique to Windlass flat hexagonal cross section. Now, as far as style or class, this sword, technically, as we talked about before, postdates the Oakshott typology. So it is very similar to a Type 13A, so you could technically classify it as a 13A, but still I would call it unclassified, as again it postdates the typology. The guard's total length is 13.5 inches from terminal to terminal. It does have this nice 1-inch inclusion on both sides of the guard, and then the guard quillion dimensions are a 1/4 inch by a 1/4 inch squared. The material of the guard is a mild steel, and as far as its classification goes, this sword, similar to the blade, postdates the Oakshott typology, being a later period, pre-Renaissance sword. So, you could technically just classify it as a Lowland Claymore style guard, because they were so unique to themselves, similar to the Highland Claymore guard. So in that regard, I would just stylize it or classify it as a Lowland Claymore guard, but in regards to the Oakshott typology, it would go as unclassified. The grip's total length is 13 inches long. Its base circumference is 5.5 inches, and that tapers down to about 4.5 inches at the pommel. The material of the handle is a nice hard wood, and the original grip material was a white wrapped hemp cord. Now, that hemp cord is still on this sword. What I did was I used that hemp cord as my underwrap, and then I put the leather and risers over that. So in regards to the original grip, it wasn't bad. It was very bland and plain aesthetically, but overall it wasn't very comfortable to grip either, because it was very just rough and it just didn't feel right in the hand. So that is one of the main reasons why, besides just adding some extra aesthetic in appearance to the sword, I added the leather and risers. So in regards to that, not the best handle material, but also definitely easily customizable. The pommel's total length is 2.25 inches long. It has a base circumference of 6.5 inches at its fattest point, and as you can see, it has this nice onion bloom style which tapers down and up. Like the guard, it is made of mild steel, and its construction is peen to the tang, as you can see there. Now, as far as type or style, again, this type of pommel postdates the oakshott typology, similar to the garden blade. So technically, through my study of it, it's always been just referenced as an onion bloom style pommel. You saw it a lot on great swords, specifically also claymores, but also you even saw the style kind of on even more, swept hilt swords or basket hilt swords of that Renaissance to early modern periods. So in regards to that, you could sort of classify it oakshott wise as maybe a type T3, but still it's much too smooth and it's kind of circular to be that style. So it's better just to classify it as itself as being the onion bloom style of pommel. And finally, we'll look at the scabbard. Well, as you can see, there is none. Well, sort of there is, because what I have done is I have made a custom demi scabbard for this sword. Now, a lot of you might be thinking, well, you're just trying to copy Braveheart, the Wallace, Mel Gibson sword on that. Not necessarily. These demi scabbards were used pretty commonly in the time period. Now, what a demi scabbard pretty much does is it's not necessarily meant as a ricasso grip, as some people think. I mean, it can be used that way, but primarily it was used for carry. So if you had the sword in hand, you could carry the sword, walk with it, or, as is more traditionally seen, carry it on your shoulder like this as you marched into battle. So I did that simply because of the practicality. I made this out of some light hardwood, did a little riser design and leather binding. It is removable, so you don't actually need it on there. I have noticed though that having it on there kind of helps stiffen the blade a little and in cutting, so I usually leave it on for cutting just because it keeps the blade from whipping around. So anyway, speaking of cutting, next up we're going to have a little quick cutting session of this blade. I know I have 2 other videos on my channel, but I think you guys are going to be impressed with this one. Definitely stick around for the end because I actually try some single-handed cuts with this guy. So we'll see you back after the cutting video. welcome back. I hope you guys enjoyed the cutting footage. So, in regards to the re-review, the final thoughts, I've owned this sword for a little over 5 years now. I purchased it new from Museum Replicas on one of their weekend deal of the day weapon sales. Now, initially, what kind of got me interested in the sword was simply looking at a two-handed or greatsword type. It's always been a sword that I've liked, a style of sword that I've liked, but as far as the budget market, it's really hard to find, a quality, fully functional one. Even the functional ones do have some, kind of poor construction and fit that might make them not suitable for cutting or for practical use. And that's one thing that attracted me to this sword. Some of the key point features of this sword is it does have a peened pommel. It does have a full tang rather than kind of more of the shorter rotted tang that's threaded as many of the other greatsword styles of the budget market do. Nice steel fittings and a really nice well-tempered blade. And I know a lot of complaints to this was the flexibility, the whippiness, but that wasn't uncommon historically either. When you look at such a large sword, and even if you give it a moderate amount of distal taper, it's so long, it's going to have a lot of flexibility. If you don't have that flexibility, you have a really thick blade and it's going to be extremely heavy. So as far as being a budget sword in that handling regard, getting it down to that 6-pound weight, having the nice, high, or low point of balance, it's really, pretty amazing for a sword under $300. Getting, this type of quality really impressed me. And after owning it and having it for so many years, I really do love this sword. It really stemmed and created an interest for me in study of greatsword history, greatsword styles, all the different types and styles of greatswords throughout continental Europe for the time period, as well as just the claymore itself, and more specifically the Lowland Claymore, which I don't feel gets as much as attention compared to the more recognized or popular Highland style claymore. Unfortunately, like the last two swords featured on Sword Re-Reviews, this sword has been discontinued by its manufacturer, Windlass Steelcrafts. But I have checked the web and seen that it is available on a few select vendors worldwide. Now, of course, that stock is more than likely limited and could even have sold as I speak today. But I want to mention one more time another nice place to look for, secondhand swords or used swords, and that is Sword Forum Classifieds. Now, a little inside information. Now, I was checking around on swordbuyersguideforum.com, which I'm a member of, but there is a Windlass Heroes Warsword available on Sword Buyers Guide Forum. So if you're interested, definitely check out Sword Buyers Guide Forum. Go into the main page. You'll see the classifieds sub-forum. Click on that. Go to items for sale or trade, and you will see that Windlass Heroes Warsword. So in regards to final thoughts, two-handed greatswords are few and far between in the production market, especially in the sub-300, more budget price point. That's where I feel this sword really shined, because it was one of the true fully functional greatswords that was available sub-300. I mean, there are a few other swords on the market right now, but most of them, again, fall short due to their hilt construction. With such a large sword, you definitely want something that is peened or has a really nice, tight, solid construction. You want a nice, solid, thick tang, because again, this is a lot of sword, it's a lot of weight, and when you put it in motion, that motion is going to go, with it. So in that regard, it is sad to see it gone, but again, that's what re-reviews is for. It's to show these swords in a positive light, get some attention to them, and hopefully get the manufacturer's attention as well as vendors to maybe even offer a new production run or even a special commission reissue. So I hope you enjoyed this third episode of Sword Re-Reviews. Check back next week when I will keep up with the Scottish theme and I will be reviewing my Windlass, Battlecry line, Culloden, Basket Hilt broadsword. So if you have any questions or requests, be sure to leave them in the comment section. I'd be happy to answer them. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.